a partner at Madrona and one of the sharpest VCs in the US, specializing in security and AI. A few weeks ago, Vivek dropped a post that lit up LinkedIn, calling out the wave of AI powered SOC analysts and what's real versus what's just noise. With investments across security ops, AI infrastructure, and early stage companies, Vivek sits in a rare position between founders pitching the next big thing and CISOs trying to cut through the hype. In this episode, we will get into why saying you're an AI driven means very little, what CISOs actually care about, and how VCs like Vivek help filter out the fluff and answer the question, who is actually solving the real problems? So Vivek, great to sit down with you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. James, thanks so much for having me.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Let's crack on with some questions because I really think this will be very interesting. So when we start with AI and security as a reality check, we're looking at your LinkedIn post and it called out a trend that we've all seen lately. Vendors rushing to say that they've built the next AI powered something. So what's made you speak up about that specifically?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I would say, if anyone who was at RSA a couple of weeks ago would see that I think the word AI was more prominent than the word security, right? So it was the trend. It's been the trend for the last few years where every security vendor is rushing out to say that they have some AI powered solution or they're AI native or they're doing something with the AI. So whenever everyone's saying that they're doing something with AI, you really have to come in with a bit of a sharper lens. And look, I understand why, right? I mean, we've been talking about this at Madrona for, several years now. We have an AI conference we've been putting up, even pre-chat GPT and all of this. It's a real trend. There's incredible technology out there. There's builders who are building things that we couldn't have even built 5 years ago across a number of different domains, not just security, but in cloud infrastructure and vertical applications and horizontal applications. Now, the difficult thing is when you have every security vendor rushing out to say they have AI, it becomes very confusing for CISOs and for buyers. And they, in fact, get skeptical, right? They go from, hey, this is a really cool solution to like, wait, is what you're selling me or pitching me really what I'm going to be using? And so the point of this article that we wrote was saying, how do we separate the hype from reality? Because yes, there's a lot of hype around AI. At the same time, there's only a handful of companies or a handful of products that we think are really cutting through the noise and building something that's going to be really special and it's going to stand the test of time 5 to 10 years out. And the last thing I'd say on this is that, security already is a very crowded market, right? If you're even pre-2022, if you were coming to RSA, you would see that there are so many security vendors for every, level of security, AppSec, data security, cloud, you go down the list, there was 5 to 10 to 20 plus vendors, startups all the way to big companies. And I think that's just become even noisier in this AI landscape. But our view is that there's going to be an incredible set of businesses that are created and being formed that are going to be $10 billion plus size companies if they do it the right way and they solve customers' actual problems. So that's how we sort of look at what's real versus what's fake in AI. I know we'll get into some of this, but that was setting the stage of why we thought it was important to put a piece out there that just said, AI is great, everyone's going to talk about it, but only some of it is actually real.
Very clear, thank you. And you mean you're a top VC in the home of tech in San Francisco. How are you evaluating first as a business, but maybe also as an individual yourself? What's hype versus what's real when looking at new AI-driven security tools? Is there a way, or are you sort of figuring that out day to day right now?
We're figuring it out with everybody else. We think that there are some ways that are that we think are more scientific in nature, or that we think we can start creating templates for, but we're also figuring it out. And so what I'd say is, one, you have to separate the world between early stage companies and products and then more growth stage companies and products. I think the other lens we look at things is AI or LLM native companies and what we call AI and LLM enhanced companies. So, to give you an example, I think in the we're not investors in these companies, but in the email security world, you'll have something like, abnormal security, which is, or if you go even further, before that, you've got Proofpoint and Mimecast and, these email security products that were built 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And then you have something like Abnormal, which kind of came around pre-LLMs and did a fantastic job of getting to 100 million plus of revenue by building a really great product that people actually use in email sec. And then now you have LLM native companies like Sublime Security, which is a cool company that made a lot of noise during RSA, and they actually are built on top of AI models where they can filter out emails, they can help security administrators inside of companies actually do a lot of more sort of customization around what they can filter out, and it's no longer a black box, and they can actually use all these interesting security engines and detection rules to weed out email. So what we're seeing is like, okay, can you do that with the LLMs, with models, with AI? Are you building a product that is utilizing this new technology in a way that you couldn't even have built 5 years ago with machine learning models? So I think that's number one, is like at the product level, what are you doing? I think the other axis to look at is, what is the product and the company servicing the customer for? So it was interesting. I'd say after OpenAI launched, GPT-4, and after ChatGPT came out, I think there was a lot of companies that were going after how do we secure the model. So it was like security for AI, right? How do you secure the model? How do you secure the data that's going inside and outside these models? JP Morgan Chase talked about, how everybody was using ChatGPT inside the organization, but like they didn't actually allow people to use ChatGPT, right? Because they didn't want people's bank information and credit card information filtering through an employee just kind of randomly using ChatGPT. And so I think it was a very smart, initial move to say, okay, well, models are great, chatting with the model is great, and we need security for that. I think what I'm seeing now more, and I personally believe is a bigger opportunity, is not just securing the model, but using the models for security, right? So the spin on that is, how do you use AI to do all the things that organizations need for security? And so that's email security. That's how do you supercharge the SOC analyst? I invested in a company that is basically helping create a new way of doing security awareness training. So there's like an old school way of doing security awareness training. Once a quarter, you watch this 10-minute video and then you go off. And guess what? It doesn't matter how much data and cloud and network security you have. If an employee presses the wrong link, then all of that is for naught, right? And so what I'm interested in seeing is, how are founders thinking about using this technology to either reimagine existing security spaces or think of entirely new ones, right? And so that's how I evaluate early stage founders, and how I can, we always have to use the lens of like digging in. What are you really using AI for? And then the second part of that is, I think for growth stage companies, it's actually a little bit easier in a way, right? Because if you have customers, I know we'll talk about this at some point. To me, we even kind of stopped talking about AI with growth stage companies. It's, are you delivering a service that customers like? At the end of the day, a lot of customers actually don't really care about AI. CISOs don't really care about AI. They're just like, are you solving the need that I have? Now, if you can use AI, and if you can use models, and if you can use, all of the tools at our disposal now to do that, I think it's great. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. But at the end of the day, we always go back to, are you solving a real problem? What's the vision of the founder? And those two things is what we believe can help be the start of a great company.
So I think the interesting thing here is you're looking at not just positioning, but what the core of the company is looking to achieve, right? So you've said companies need to lead with their value, not necessarily AI. And obviously we're seeing AI as the buzzword now. So diving a little bit deeper, what's your advice to founders trying to sell into security teams, or even looking to grow or get off the ground? What's your advice to them regarding that value?
Yeah, I think you have to sell the value. I think if you're talking to a CISO, if you're talking to a security practitioner, most of them can see through the bullshit, right? If excuse my language there, but like I say this because see a lot of BS at RSA, and you see a lot of noise, and I get it. Like, you have to find a way to stand out. But I think when you go and you talk to a customer, the number one thing is they have very specific needs. Most of these CISOs are understaffed. They don't have enough budget. They're getting reached out to by hundreds, if not thousands, of vendors. And so my advice to our founders, and what I'm really excited about, is when I see companies that say, hey, yeah, we have AI, that's all great, but we can actually deliver a product that's going to solve your problem, either help you with time savings, help you with cost savings, more importantly, help secure your environment. If I was a cloud security or data security company, I'd be selling that promise. Like, I think what Wiz did incredibly well is they didn't go around and just talk about AI. Now, of course, on the website and all this, you'll see some mention of AI. They're like, we're going to be the easiest possible way for you to set up cloud security, which is something you fundamentally need in this new environment. Right. And so you make it really seamless, you make it really fast. They could do it in a way that was cheaper and easier than several other, like cloud security products and cloud security posture management products that came before them, right? So that's when I say value. The value is speed to implementation. The value is, are you actually protecting the environment? Are you doing it in a way that's economical and feasible for the buyer? And can you do it in such a way that it's not a huge lift for the CISO? They don't want to have to be managing 30 different products. They want to be able to put something into the environment and not have to think about it too much. And so I think, like, being able to use those words, notice I never used AI, right? These are fundamental business concepts that have been helping since Oracle probably sold their first database, or going even further before that, right? The technology will always change. I think tech is always changing, and that's what's fun about my job and our jobs and being in this in this environment, is things are always, there's going to be something else people get hyped up about in 10 years. But at the end of the day, if you really want to build a company, sell solutions, I think and especially in security, you really have to pitch why you are solving a problem. And then you can always say AI is helpful and I've got a new way of doing it, and AI might make me faster or cheaper or better. But those are the things that matter. It's not the AI part. It's how are you delivering value. So that would be my advice to founders, is use those words more. Now, of course, when a VC is asking, how do you do it? Then you might talk about AI. I think, pretty much every startup is using AI. Every company is figuring out how to use AI. You might be using it not just in your front-facing product, but on the back end too, right? If you have engineers, your engineers are probably going to use Windsurf for Cursor, right? If you have designers, they might be using some next-gen AI design tool. And so I think that there's ways to incorporate AI throughout your whole business. And I think that's going to make companies better than a company that's not using AI. But I would deliver with the value, or I would sell with the value and what you can deliver, as opposed to selling with AI.
It's interesting. You've touched on two things here, Vivek. One is what you saw at RSA, and then also what you're seeing as companies are pitching or talking to potential customers. And it seems that with AI at the moment, because it's such a shakeup of the industry or of the market, especially around cyber, is that you're hearing of what you think companies want to be saying to their customers, and really therein lies the panic, to maybe strip back a little bit and focus on AI as added value eventually, but still really the value is, what are you doing? Why are you better than everybody else? What is your true value over time, and how can you help your end user, and then bring in AI at a later stage?
That's my feeling, and I see this with a lot of brilliant and incredible early stage founders, especially technical founders. Right? They are they're so wrapped up in what they're building, and I understand why. They've come up with this incredible solution. Often they've come from an engineering background, or this is a problem they've been working on, and so the way it comes out is all about what they've built. Right. But from the CISO angle, from the security buyer angle, or really from any buyer angle, I would say this even with CROs and in other functions in which we invest too, they're really trying to hear, what's the value? What value are providing to me? Like, all your AI stuff, okay, you used a combination of cloud and 4.0, and you've also used some open source models and used some llama, like all of that is great. But at the end of the day, what are you doing for me? Right? Like what value are you delivering for me? And I think that that's where you can start to see founders evolve. And I think the really incredible founders not only have great technical depth and understand the technical differentiation of their product, they know how to sell it too, right? We always say like, you know, you have to build the product and then you actually have to sell it. These are for companies we invest in, right? These are venture-backed companies. And so I think the really incredible founders are the ones who can marry the two of them. You know, why have I built something differentiated, but how do I deliver it in a way that if I'm talking to a CISO, I'm talking to the CISO of Disney or Kraft or, you know, all of that, they're dealing with a million different things, right? They're managing people, they're managing systems, they're managing processes, they're managing up, they have a board to report to often, right? And a CISO job is not hard, or sorry, I should say CISO job is not easy, it's very hard where, you know, they have so many alerts, they have so the threat of hacks, we see this all the time, you know, and now they're beholden to a board and to the rest of their executive team where they're dealing with a lot. And so when I think a founder has the ability to pitch them and get in front of them, it's better to sell the solution. Now, of course, they may ask, how do you do it? Right? And can you do it in a better way than my existing platforms? I'm already using CrowdStrike. I'm already using Microsoft Defender. I'm already using this. Why is this better? Then, you know, you can show maybe because of the way they've built it, because of the way they've architected the way they've thought about it, they can deliver it in an interesting way. And so one of the kind of clear examples on this is that the blog post we wrote was on AI SOCs, right? And like, so AI for the Security Operations Center. And, you know, in talking to customers, you'll hear them say, well, hey, look, the problems that I'm dealing with is not AI related. It's that my SOC turnover is really high. It's that there's a lot of burnout at the security analyst level, especially for L1 alerts. There's just, you know, not enough budget for me to hire the number of people I need. So I hear all this about AI, that's great, but then the, you know, company is like a drop zone, for example, that we're not investors in, but certainly excited by. Like they are saying, we're going to put an agent inside. It's like the way they sell it is like saying, it's like having a software intern. It's like having a security intern come and sit inside your organization, and it's 1/3 the cost of what you'd pay a SOC analyst for, but they'll work 24/7, right? That's selling the solution. That's saying you have a security need right now. You have a labor shortage, and we're going to fill that labor shortage. Now, they're using AI, they're using agents, they're using all that cool stuff, but the way they deliver that is the interesting part, right? So that's what gets us excited. Like, yeah, building a great product, you need to build a great product, right? You can't differentiate at some point without building a great product in most cases. But I think that in order to scale, in order to get distribution, you have to be able to sell the solution. And so that's how that's, you know, when I look at RSA and when I'm there, I'm like, who's selling the solution? Like who versus who's just saying, I'm AI for X, I'm AI for Y.
Vivek, very good advice. I think moving on from AI, I know you've got an advisory group of CISOs. What are they telling you right now that they actually need? What are you hearing from, I guess, CISOs well placed in the tech and cyberspace?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've got a group of about 15 or 16 CISOs. It's a terrific group. We started this about a year and a half ago. We've got folks all the way from large public companies to, you know, even some high growth private companies, just really terrific, you know, security leaders who have been around for a long time. I would say there isn't any one thing. What I do hear is that from the large security, or for the large companies, for the CISOs of large companies, they're not even thinking all the way down to this like granular AI level. They're just like, we're still in the middle of moving from on-prem to cloud, you know? And so like, we're still doing digitization of all of our workloads. And so, you know, Wiz was like the first cloud security product that we used, right? And then now they're starting to look at, you know, one or two other solutions. So they're not even at the point yet that they're really thinking about, or they can really buy these like very hyper specific, you know, AI solutions or model AI companies and things like that. They're like, we're not even there yet, right? I think for the ones that are smaller and higher growth, they're aware of a lot of these vendors and a lot of these companies. But they're still figuring out like, what do I actually need today versus what do I not need? I would say that the SOC analyst part is interesting. Like that's something I do hear, because whether it's an AI SOC or even using a managed detection and response company or going off to MSSP, like alert fatigue is a real thing. So like at the basic level, a lot of these CISOs who are dealing with tons of alerts are just trying to figure out, how do I triage these alerts better? Because it's an important part of my business. Like I need to make sure I'm dealing with that appropriately. And so I think that is an area that's ripe for disruption, and that could come from, there's a lot of companies that are trying to attack that right now, but that's a real problem that CISOs are dealing with. Another one is on the data security side, right? And so it's not just for AI models, but people are just trying to say like, okay, I'm dealing with all this data that's coming in. I need to figure out, how do I secure that data? How do I make sure that I can mask it appropriately and anonymize it, whether it's credit card data or healthcare data or anything that's like private and confidential. Because right now, like every CEO and every executive team is saying, where's our data? Where's our data reside? What's going on there? And so I think that's number two. The number three is phishing. I think especially, because of what we're seeing with AI and deep fakes, that's like, we talked about how AI is a solution. The other part of it is AI actually is creating a bigger problem for CISOs, because you have way more phishing attacks, you have way more deep fakes, you have way more AI generated malware. And so what used to be like, you might get, I don't know, 20 phishing attacks a month, now you might get 10,000, because it's just so easy to create the phishing attacks and create this malicious content that you can just start bombarding companies with it. And we're seeing that happen. And that's partly why we invested in this company Anagram, to help, businesses deal with that and secure themselves against it. So I would say those are three of the big ones, right? Like SOC analyst fatigue, that's a labor shortage problem. Data security, that's more of a business problem. And then phishing, that's more of the, you can call it an AI problem, but it's become such a big problem that every CISO is trying to figure out, how do I deal with it? Because one hack gets you on the front of the Wall Street Journal, and that can be detrimental, not just for the company internally, but for the company externally too. And we saw that with, the T-Mobile attack, several years ago. We saw that with Snowflake. We saw that with Gmail more recently. So those are the things I'm hearing from CISOs, is how do I make sure I can keep off the front page of the Wall Street Journal, protect my employees appropriately? How do I do that?
Wow, it's a lot for, just looking from a CISO perspective, a lot for them to take on, prioritize, manage day to day, look at get into the day-to-day weeds, but also manage the bigger picture. So I can understand many of those challenges, even from my role and in my company. And just touching on something you mentioned beforehand, because I think it's interesting. You said there's a gap between essentially cloud native startups and large enterprise, and you said still running on-prem. So I guess, what does that disconnect look like, really? But also from your perspective, are we talking about that founders are too far ahead of the market really at the moment, or you saying that the companies are still fighting a more established fight?
I think there's just I think it's more that there is a gap in the market in terms of the perception of how far along some enterprises are and where they really are at, right? I think a lot of, especially I'm talking at the large enterprise level, for companies that have been around for 20, 30 years, many of them are still in that transition, right? So you can pitch them all the next gen super niche AI solutions you want. At the end of the day, they're figuring out, how do I go from on-prem to cloud? How do I bring in the basic building blocks of network security, firewall, and I think that's helpful for founders to know, because it's not saying that you can't sell them to them. You might not be able to sell a solution today, but get to know them early, figure out their problems. And as they go through the evolution, then it may make more sense for them to bring in like a next generation WAF or a next generation firewall. For many of them, they're like, I'm using Microsoft, I'm using Palo Alto, I'm using CrowdStrike. That's what I'm using, right? They're not even thinking like, let alone late stage startup, forget, early stage startup. So I think it's one of those things where it's always good to get on the radar of big companies, but just be empathetic to the problems that large, enterprise CISOs are dealing with versus companies that are a little bit more early stage, or companies that are, who are cloud native from the get-go, right? Selling to, a GitLab is going to be different from selling to, to Pfizer, right? And it's not just the account size, but it's what can their environment handle and what are they looking for, and all those kinds of things. The reason I also differentiated between the cloud native and or I say AI native and non-AI native companies is because it's important to think about, like, how do I have to re-architect my own infrastructure and my own product in order to sell something that the market wants, right? So we see this in other sectors, like, Figma, like they had their design conference last week, and they're talking about all of these new products that they've been rolling out, because they know if they don't do that, it's going to be very hard to compete with the AI native companies that are building this from the ground up. And so I see that with security companies all the time too. And I think, going back to the original point, it's important for, I think, security founders to understand who they're selling to, what their problems are, where they are in the evolution of things, and not get too ahead of their skis in terms of saying they're still building blocks, like basic building blocks they have to put in place first before selling the, the kind of shiny AI ball or whatever the new thing is, on the block.
So I think good advice to both established companies and startups there, Vivek. For me, one of the things that is interesting for on our end is how startups stand out when pitching or talking to enterprises. What is your advice for startups to stand out? You've given good advice on how to win the long game, but how would you get noticed as a startup?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ground game you have to do, right? I think some of the companies that I've seen that have done a really good job of just getting in front of enterprises, they use their network, right, to get in front of CISOs. How do you know somebody who knows somebody who can, get you in front of the CISO? And again, it's just pitching a solution that makes sense for them. And I've seen people, use your VCs, use your board, use your investor network, use your friends network, use your company's network. Like, I've seen a lot of success from, again, I go back to one of our companies, Anagram. Their founder got their first 5 or 6 enterprise logos just by sending LinkedIn messages to the CISO saying, this is the problem you have, and here's how we can fix it. That's so compelling for CISOs, especially when they're just getting inundated with all these emails saying, oh, we have this AI powered whatever. Like they're just like, okay, I have this problem. How do I fix it? How do you figure out what the problem is that the CISO has before you even talk to them, right? What research can you do? What telemetry can you get that allows you to figure out what the CISO is looking for and what the CISO needs before you sell to them? And so that's like, have they gone and done interviews? Have they, said something in RSA about like a certain product or problem they're having? And how do you creatively find a way to get in front of them to actually deliver some value? So I'm not saying it's easy. It's really difficult. And, and also you can pick your spots, right? If you're selling an enterprise solution, I wouldn't focus on, SMB, because it's not going to resonate the same. If you have an SMB or mid-market product, then focus on that segment and see who you can get in front of and who you can, actually show you can deliver value to. So I think it's a combination of having, being able to hustle, being able to get in front of CISOs. I talk a lot about CISOs. The levels 1 or 2 under a CISO are also really great entry points, because remember, the CISO is dealing with a lot. Sometimes you have a security, VP of security or head of security that's actually far more in touch with what these new products and companies are and startups, what they're doing. And so I often say target that segment too, right? I've seen a lot of founders do dinners for heads of security. You bring people in a room and just say, what are your issues? What are the things that you're talking about? The question, James, you asked about, what are the problems CISO is dealing with? Sometimes for our CISO advisory group, I don't want to pitch anything. I'm just like, you guys need a forum. You all need a forum to talk. This is a forum you can talk and exchange ideas. And I think through that, you can start to hear, okay, here are the problems they're dealing with. Here's the issues they're dealing with. Here's the products they've tried that may not have worked in the past. And then over time, you can start to insert your own product and think about how you can enhance your own product. But I think community is really big for security teams. I think that like being able to show some kind of solution versus just saying, here's what I'm building without any context is really important. And the third, so just know that you might not pitch something and get a yes in 24 hours. It might take weeks or months or maybe even years, but it's worth building those relationships now.
Really interesting. I'm nodding along there because I'm agreeing with you about the evolution of security teams. They're getting larger, they're getting more intricate, and actually we're seeing great examples on our end of really intelligent, ambitious, hardworking GRC teams who are definitely on the younger side, and they're coming with their own take on security. And it's really fascinating, actually, the evolution of the GRC teams as well. So they might well be under the CISO, but they're increasingly important, their role in security today.
Absolutely. And I think compliance was seen as a bit of a dirty word 5 years ago, certainly among VCs, that they're like, compliance, I don't know if I want to, they don't have budget and all that. What's interesting is now compliance and security are blending, right? A lot of these compliance GRC teams, risk teams sit in security. They're working hand in hand with the problems the security teams are dealing with every day, and they're working on big problems. And so I absolutely think that that is a great group to target and great folks to target. And they're very smart, they're sharp, they are aware of all the risk that's happening in the world, and they're always ensuring, how do I ensure that my security teams are working in lockstep, and I'm working in lockstep with them, and we're dealing with the right issues. So I absolutely think that, don't think it's just the CISO. Even for mid-sized companies, there are often security teams underneath. And then you can go down to the analyst level, the individual security analyst level. How do you helping that analyst? What are the problems that they're having? Are there ways that you can help deliver value to them?
Great. I think we could go for another hour just talking about how to help startups and businesses. A wealth of information, Vivek. But we're coming up to the end. So this is the penultimate question, and I want to talk a little bit about your role day to day. You said that you sit between the founders and the CISOs when we first spoke. So what's the most important thing VCs can do to help both those sides, and how do you do with your company?
Yeah, so I would just also mention that security is a big part of what I do, but it's not the only thing I do. And so I do get a chance to speak to CISOs a lot. And so the way we've set it up is we have a quarterly CISO advisory group meeting, where once a quarter we get this group together and have a really awesome discussion, and we do a few dinners a year and things like that. And then we also have a private Slack channel where we have great asynchronous communication about different companies and trends, and they get to chat with each other about hey, I have this question that's come up from my CISO or my CEO. How do you deal with this? Or this problem's come up. What I think is the VC should play a role in, and hopefully that's one thing we do play a role in, is taking all of the stuff we're hearing from the CISOs and communicating that back to the founder community, because we can act as a liaison between the two. Right, where we are sharing the things that we're learning, what we're hearing. Can we back test ideas? Can we battle test ideas with them and get that back to the founder, so that the founder can then either, spin up a cycle in their product team and build product a little bit differently, or even pitch the message differently. All the things that we were talking about pitching and delivering value. If I can hear that from the CISO community, I can help them. The other part is introductions. So, once, especially when we invest in a company, we put that company in front of our CISO advisory group. We get them to pitch in front of 15 of the best CISOs anywhere. And I think it's super helpful for them, right? Because they get direct access to some really great minds and great thinkers and people who have been doing this for 10, 20 years. And I think that's hugely valuable to the founder. It's hugely valuable to us as part of our diligence process, or even after we've made the investment. How do you go refine the pitch for the next group, right? Or what are the questions that these CISOs are thinking that might not even come up in your mind? So that's hugely helpful, I think, for the founders. And the third part is the CISOs each have an incredible community themselves, right? So every CISO is connected to 15, 20 more CISOs or security leaders. And so that becomes a great large network for our founders to be able to tap into. So, I've been very thankful to our CISO advisory group. I think it's one of those groups where there's a lot of community. They like sharing ideas. Many cases, they know each other already. And so there's some great versions of this at other venture firms. CyberStarts has a great program here. YL Ventures has a really great program here. But I think those are the things that we try and do, is be this bridge between the CISO group and the founder group. And then at some point, really put them in direct touch so that it's mutually beneficial for both sides.
Sounds good. Maybe one day I'll be a CISO, and I'm lucky enough to be in your group.
Absolutely.
But not just yet. Final question, Vivek. Looking ahead to next year, what kind of security innovation would you invest in?
It's a great question. I think right now we are very interested in this AI for Security Operations Center. I think that's something that is a very real problem today. And it's something that we continue to be excited about. I would say, broadly speaking, next year, identity continues to be a really interesting space for us. So we've invested in companies like Clerk, which one of my partners led our investment and sits on the board. And that's authentication, and it's much more of an external facing authentication tool. Like, think of it as like the next gen Auth0, and they're seeing tremendous growth and have many developers using them. But I'm also interested in seeing what happens inside of workforce identity. So on the internal side, like, we've had companies like Okta and Ping Identity and some, really large, even look at all the success that's happening with private equity backed companies that have recently IPO'd. But I think that there's going to be a really interesting new play in identity, given what we're seeing in NHIs, given what we're seeing in, in machine identities that are sometimes 50 to 100x the number or quantity that we're seeing of human identities. Now, we haven't invested in an NHI specific company, but I do think there's going to be a very interesting identity play that could be the Okta for the next 10, 20 years and build a really big business. So huge market, real pain point, real dollars to be spent on that. And so that's something I'm excited about for the next 12 months.
Well, you got me excited about it too. And we'll be keeping a close eye on that prediction. Vivek, our time is up, but I want to do this again with you sometime soon. So it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. I know it's just the start of your day, so hopefully this has helped you into a nice, productive day. And I really appreciate the time you spent with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, James. Thanks for having me. And yes, this is a great way to start the day. And hopefully you get some rest after this, and I'm sure we'll talk again.
Hopefully. Thank you, Vivek. Take care.
Take care.